Good evening. It is 5 p.m. and I'd like to call to order this emergency meeting of the Newmarket School Board. It is April 6th, and we'll start this meeting as we do all others with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have space on the agenda for public comment. We don't have any public members here. Susan, I have not received any public comment. I have not either. You have not either, so we will proceed. Basically, we called this meeting tonight, one, to review the recommendations of the COVID Protocol Review Task Force, and there have been some other changes that have come up since our last meeting on the 1st, so this is what I get from Susan. So, Susan, why don't we begin with your report?
Okay, so just wanted to publicly acknowledge that there is a new executive or emergency order from the governor. I'm sure there's lots of conversation and dialogue going on in all kinds of media locations about this. And so the order, when we had met, he had announced that all schools would, be back to 5 days a week just before we walked into our meeting, but there was no executive order in print for us to be able to read it, digest it, and better understand it. Neither had there been, prior to that announcement, any dialogue with superintendents or labor associations or anyone else in the state. So, as has often been the case, we're all kind of left shocked for a moment to try to understand what's being told to us, and then always scrambling for guidance and refinement about what does this mean. There is no guidance that has been provided to us. There was a conversation with the commissioner on Monday, and based on all the questions that we had asked, he said that they would respond to our questions in writing. Now, when we'll get that, I don't know. It wasn't particularly helpful in terms of, being able to just move forward. So I think each school district is doing what we've done throughout the pandemic, and that's trying to meet and come up with some kind of a plan independently based on what our needs are and our abilities are here in our various school districts. So a couple of things that were, I guess, a little startling for all of us to hear was when we said, well, we have, collective bargaining agreements and we have MOAs that have been, negotiated in good faith, that were connected to the plans that, we submitted and were approved, and, we can't, first we have to have a plan, and then we have to talk about what the implications might be with labor. And they said, well, we've given you 2 weeks, so get that done. Of course, we don't have a plan, so it's hard to have that conversation. So I think that was a little bit, we were all kind of taken back by that kind of cavalier response to our questions, but it was consistent with the tone that was conveyed throughout the meeting. They said another thing, of course, a lot of things were asked, but just to the things I think resonated or were important, for us moving forward, is to understand that waivers are highly unlikely going to be offered to school districts. Only if extreme medical situations arise within the school district, and then it requires the approval of the governor, the commissioner, and DHHS.
So, like a mass hospitalization of students and teachers would require permission from the governor?
Yes.
Thank you.
So superintendents no longer have any authority. Neither do the board. Does the board? They've kind of taken away local control in that regard. The other thing that was mentioned, though, I don't know to what degree we can rely on what was said. I'm sure they took down our questions, and then they'll have their little side caucus meetings and then decide how they want to answer and then let us know. But there did seem to be a little wiggle room provided in that if all teachers are not fully vaccinated, that perhaps you can get a little bit of a variance in when you implement your plan. So I know that Exeter, for example, has submitted their plan. Their teachers will be fully vaccinated, just I think at the end of, or at the beginning of April vacation, so that their plan would start the first week of May. We're in a similar situation. Our staff are not fully vaccinated until 2 weeks from this Friday. So we don't have that, we don't have full vaccination here.
Are they going by the vaccination date for the 2 weeks after the vaccination?
Great question. So vaccination, you're officially vaccinated 2 weeks after your last shot. So you're not considered to be vaccinated until 2 weeks after that. So that's...
And that's for all vaccines. For your second shot, and that's for all vaccines.
Well,
it's
if
a
you
commonly
get
accepted.
Johnson, my understanding at Johnson is a one shot, and it's 28 days. That's what I was told. But we didn't have Johnson, so I haven't really dug deep in or validated that. But that's what I heard, is that if you get the Johnson, which is not what we have, you have to wait 28 days to be considered vaccinated, effectively vaccinated. So the message was basically that they felt that there was more risks having students not be in school than there is having COVID. So that was really the big overarching message. For the 5 days a week, there are no hour requirements, which is odd. So, school districts could come back, 2 hours, Monday through Friday, that would meet the requirement, or 1 hour. I'm not saying we'll do that. I'm just going from one extreme to the other. They could actually have fewer or less in-person, face-to-face hours of instruction than we offer right now and still meet this requirement. So it doesn't... In those ways, and maybe they'll provide guidance afterwards, but by then we'll all have our plans and we'll be so far down the road that, like happened this summer, it didn't particularly seem to be helpful. The other thing that was asked is, in Rockingham County our numbers are escalating. In Newmarket they're escalating. 3 new cases. We're in double digits. We've been in double digits for the last couple of weeks. We have a couple of COVID cases amongst staff now and students, and we've quarantined quite a number of students over the weekend. So it's active. Yet they were pretty clear that there's pretty much no conditions under which they will reinstate quarantining, even after travel. And of course travel is coming upon us, so we can't do planned remote like we were able to do previously. They will not approve waivers for that, and unless, I suppose, if students come back and in the middle of the week, which is likely when symptoms will start to present. Typically they present between 2 and 14 days upon return. Then you might get into this catastrophic medical circumstance that would then maybe motivate them to allow us to stay out of school until the rising numbers pass or something. So that was a very sobering. It was, I don't want to call it a conversation because it's never a conversation with the state, never. But that is the message. And so our work this week, as you all know, we have our second clinic coming up and we're the host. So our efforts have been in, getting that clinic up and running. We met with the state on Monday and they changed our clinic hours. They clarified, what people needed to bring with them and all of that. And Patty and I have been working to get the clinic up and running for Friday. So we're you still have a few lingering issues to address with that, and now we'll start to turn our attention to better understanding what we can do. I will say I've done a lot of reading in the last few days, again trying to clarify in my own mind what current best practices in terms of protocols, and there are a few things that originally were part of the protocols that we'd all been following all year that no longer seem to be in play anymore. And one of them that could have a very positive impact on our scheduling is that staggered starts, arrivals and dismissals do not seem to be a thing anymore, However, congregating before and after school is still not, you still can't do that. And using the five entrances, I call it 5 here, it could be 6 or 7 in another school, but in our case, using separate entrances for each party, that still remains. Testing students on the way in, temperature checks, that's not the current recommendation. What they're saying is to have parents self-check at home, which is what we've done all along, and we have the form that they can use on our website. We can probably reissue it just as a reminder. And then when all kids get in class, since they'll be arriving roughly in the same time frame, then the teacher just kind of checks in on the students before they get started. If there's sniffles or they look, flush or, pale or whatever the case may be, that they'd be sent down to the nurse, and we'd follow the similar protocol. So that's a little bit different. Now, it doesn't mean that, so what that will mean is that we could potentially have the start time be more traditional. So we started, I'm just making this up. I'm just totally making this up.
We're
This is
24 hours
so,
into this.
right, I'm just saying, this number doesn't mean anything, but I'm just using it as an example. We could say high school starts at 8 and elementary school starts at 8:30, and then that's when people would need to bring them in. The big change there, though, is that we can't congregate. So kids still have to come in and go right to their class, but instead of taking 45 minutes in the morning and 45 minutes in the afternoon, it likely will be shrunk,
Right.
you
We
know?
also have kids walking around the building who get off buses, so we can't have cars and buses at the same time, so we still need to keep a little bit of a...
Maybe. I mean, we haven't processed it,
Yeah,
but I'm just
yeah.
giving it as an example of something that would change, and I'm not saying those are going to be the new start and end times at all. I'm just giving that as an example. Like right now, as Gary said, we have it staggered, so, buses arrive between here and here, 10 or 15 minutes, and then parents A through, this is elementary, parents A through P, next, and then the next, and then the walkers and the blah, blah. That would just be, this would be the time, the basic arrival time. The traffic patterns would stay the same because we're having multiple doors and stuff like that. And I'm not saying this is what we're doing. I'm just giving an example of one of the ways that the best practices for protocols have changed in a way that kind of relaxes things for us a little bit instead of ramps them up. The other thing, too, and I'm not saying this is what we're going to do, but another thing I found, interesting was that, of course, cohorts stay. I want to say that. Cohorts is still the best practice, and pushing in your UAs still, that there's no change there, but I found it interesting that now they're saying kids either eat their lunch in their classroom, or if you have a large space, if you have a large, gym or a huge cafeteria, you still have to socially distance 6 foot and all of that, but that they're saying that, they've found that if those protocols are followed, that's another thing that's a little different. However, you can't congregate in any other time and any other way, so I don't necessarily understand. It doesn't feel like there's a way to apply like a rubric, on these situations, this is how you handle it. So it still continues to be a little confusing, and you know, you really have to kind of study these different requirements, and it's not like it explains the science of why they're opining one way in a certain situation, opining another way, and what appears to the average eye to be the same circumstances. So I can't answer questions around it. I'm just sharing with you some examples of some of the things that have changed. One more thing I will mention, though, is that there's been a lot of dialogue recently in the media about this change to a 3-foot, you can go 3 foot now. It really isn't any different. It's almost like a rebranding of the idea that was presented in the fall or late summer. It really hasn't changed. I've read through it, and it still says the same thing. 6 foot is recommended, but 3 foot is permissible. I mean, that's been the case. That's been part of the conversation since, I would say, end of August or something, when schools started to say that they weren't able to figure out a way to do it and socially distant. Now, having said that, on the commissioner's call, again, they basically said do whatever is necessary to get the kids in, even if you don't follow the those particular safety protocols. We are not, I want to be clear, we are not going to compromise people's health and safety. We don't need to. Our safety protocols have worked very well. Our students understand them. You know, our staff routines. I'm not saying we're not going to go to the 5-day. We'll figure something out. I don't know what it's going to look like is all I'm saying at this point. The team right now is meeting while I'm here. We will continue to meet and try to come up with something and get something out, even if it's not perfect, some heads-up information about what we're doing, maybe, you know, early next week, Monday or Tuesday. Give us time to try to figure something out. We don't want to say, you know, put out a bunch of things that may not even be feasible. We've got to really give some thought to this. Every one of you is aware that it took us months and months and months of really intensive thinking about how to do all of this. And so we will put together a thoughtful response, and we will do our best to comply. It's likely that we'll probably ask for the waiver until after, you know, the April vacation break, because our staff aren't vaccinated. And, you know.
And we had a plan in place as well. Like, we have a plan that has worked.
We have a plan.
In person since September. Doesn't that count towards anything?
Apparently it does not. One of the things, too, since this is public, I do want to remind people why Fridays are the way that they are. And the reason why Fridays are an independent work day is because in order for us to bring our kiddos back into school, we had to eliminate all planning and prep time. And teachers really, although we are able to give them most of the time a 30-minute lunch, teachers are covering other teachers' lunch because we can't go into the cafeteria. So it's really a chess game every day to get people to have lunch, and we don't have the prep time for teachers during the regular school day like we normally would. So
Papers and get ready for the next class and all that stuff.
exactly. There's a little bit of time in the morning. There's a little bit of time in the morning, you know, to do a little bit of that, but you know the
Or if a
prep
student
time
wanted
piece
to
is
talk
not.
to a teacher.
Yes, so that's that. There's been advantage to have the staggered start, because if they want to talk to at least their homeroom teacher at the secondary level or the elementary teacher, then there's time, and that was kind of a positive. But I just wanted to remind people why our Fridays look the way that they do.
So I don't think most people realize what a day in the life of a teacher is, and I didn't really understand it until coming on the board, that you don't go in and teach from 8 to 3. You go in, you teach, and then you have time to prep and grade and then teach, and then so it's
Right.
not like
To meet with a special educator if a student's having some challenges. It depends on each school, but I just, so for us to change it and go to a 5-day schedule means we've got to figure out those things that were, like, things we couldn't figure out how to do.
On Friday, we can't do nothing.
And cohort and do all of these other things. So,
So a teacher can go an entire day with maybe a 30-minute break during the weekday?
yes, and and if they need a bathroom break, they kind of raise their hand and an administrator goes in and gives them a bathroom break.
That's where we're
I
at.
didn't know that.
And we've had administration and
That's why,
people substituting.
Yeah.
from the
SAU
SAU.
staff.
That's why we go down to
administration.
the schools every day to help provide some
We
relief.
Andrew, I think what that said to me from the beginning was we have dedicated people who are using all their bandwidth to teach these kids the maximum they can. And now the game is changing midstream because of an outside decision when, to my way of thinking, the way we've been playing it has been fairly successful for the year. Granted, I'm not the Commissioner of Education or the Governor, but it's just tough because the end is in sight at this point. And we, knock on wood, this far have made it.
70 days.
Do we know, was the executive order, or did the executive order discuss students who are already being remote? So I thought there was something about that.
So it says that families who are remote can remain remote if they, would like to continue to be remote.
And that's not, just to clarify, that's not the elementary kids who have been out for, well, they're actually back now, so never mind, it doesn't even include them.
Right.
So, yeah, I just
People
want to be very
who
clear.
committed
It's
to-
people who've been out all year,
Right.
is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the people that have been out all year, so what we've done, to kind of get a sense of what does this mean, the principals both sent out a note to our remote families to see if they wanted to, stay remote for the remainder of the year, or if they had any interest in returning, because that definitely has a huge impact on how this will play out. So we've given them till Thursday, and then we'll meet again on Thursday and Friday and every day until we can kind of process through what does this mean. In our preliminary conversations, it's likely if remote students, so we still have to provide a remote model of instruction. So we're running that kind of district model and then the in-house one. But it's highly unlikely that at the elementary level, if parents bring their students back in, that they'll have the same teacher they have remotely, right? Which to me is just not, if the teachers develop relationships with kids, and that has that influences learning, I mean, when you know a student, their mannerisms, their challenges, all of that. So we don't have any space at the elementary school, so let's be clear. There is no classroom space. There is no space to add classrooms. So the remote teachers teach in these little spaces that we've, like the old teacher workroom, or, a little, small group planning room, there's no place to put kids in a to take a class and bring them in. And then those teachers that are teaching remotely continue to teach remotely to the kids that are going to be remote, and we don't have a teacher then to teach the other ones. So it's not an easy. It's not easy, and there's no time. If they had said back, when the vaccines became available, here's some, things you might want to be prepared to do, then of course we would have been planning. But we were just told a couple of weeks ago what an exemplar we were by the commissioner. You can only imagine. Our thought was, let's keep the kids in. Let's have a strong ending to the year. Let's get our summer planning done. Let's get our math pieces done. Let's finish that and plan for next year. And of course now we're, have to scrap a lot of our work there because all of our energy's got to go into figuring this.
So just to
This challenge out.
summarize, we have a couple weeks to get a plan together, and this is a rough summary. A couple weeks to get a plan together. We're going to hopefully try to stay status quo until after the vacation, April vacation, if we can get a waiver. Remote kids will probably still should be able to stay remote. That was it, right?
Yeah.
That was one of the items, but that's pretty much
Yeah, I think those are the.
So
the highlights.
legality, like our CBAs, our MOAs are legal documents, but the governor of New Hampshire saying we don't have
I
to
don't
follow
agree
them?
with I don't agree with that. And in
No,
my
but that's what he's saying.
And that's what he's saying. That's what they're saying. I don't know if it's a specific he or a collective he, but they are saying that. And I will say that's not what we're not going to ignore our obligations to our staff. We haven't done it, and we're not going to do it, But the first step is to come up with some kind of a feasible plan, and then we can have a conversation about what impact that has, you know, so we'll have our groups together to potentially look at an MOA or dial back MOAs that we have or something. I just can't say at this point what it's going to look like, but we are going to try to work within the CBA, and we're going to try to work within the MOAs to the degree that we can.
So, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I
No.
interrupted. I hate to ask this, but as you're doing the planning, you know, before this, at the elementary school, there's like a 30-minute window where parents could drop off kids, and they would put those kids in like the cafeteria before they were sent to the classroom. That's obviously not going to happen.
No.
But just the lack of morning care in the morning is going to make like a 15, 20-minute change like really hard on parents. I just ask you to please keep that in mind as you try to work this all out. I know it's a very small part of it, but just looking out for parents.
Well, no,
Well, we always do. I mean, I have to say that all along we have done just that, but sometimes, you know, the challenge throughout this has been that there are multiple stakeholders with multiple needs. And we try to balance all of those. And yet in the effort to balance all of those, you never satisfy any one particular group, right? But we do, you know, deeply care about how all of these changes impact parents. In fact, one of the things I said to the team before I came over here was, let's remember, we have an awful lot of parents here that are also teachers that have been teaching remotely from home that are going to have to be working on Fridays now. And so as we contemplate how we're going to do this, let's remember that, you know, for the little guys, you know, they've got to have a place to go. Now, I know that, and I don't know to what degree the rec department has a Friday program. I don't know how many kids are involved. I don't know anything yet. I'm just saying it was a message that I shared with the team, and we're all concerned for everybody, honestly. We don't like any of this. We don't like any of this a bit.
And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I mean, at the beginning of all this, it was said to each district. Each district is on its own. You handle your district, you do what you need to do. Now, with 70 days left, rough estimate, right? We're going to put our foot down and say, now I demand that you do this. And executive order, done. What happens if we ignore that executive order?
I was wondering that.
Hmm?
I was wondering that.
Oh, good.
Well, we asked that.
Well, that's the first thing I'm thinking of.
You don't have a bashful group of superintendents, believe me.
Yeah.
And they said that that we all must comply. You know, perhaps we would lose some funding.
The funding that
we barely have.
Oh
goodness. You know,
what
one
are they
of
going to not
the,
pay
you,
for
I
our
mean,
school buildings?
That's the only lever they have, right?
Well,
They
that's
can
already
direct
gone,
us
so.
to do something, and they can withhold money. That's about the only levers they have.
So again, hurting the kids and the teachers
And the taxpayers.
and the taxpayers of the districts.
I'm just
I
saying,
wonder-
the only
I'd love to
lever
know
they
the
have is
Yeah.
that. They
They don't know
can,
they would do it, but that's the only recourse they would have.
exactly. So let me just end on a this is hard. This is hard for all of us. If I'm going to, so after I peeled myself off the ceiling over the weekend and came to, you know, my more balanced self, I think that there is some value if we can do it without disruption. Okay, I think there is some value to coming back after April into a more traditional schedule. I think there could be some value. There could be
There's
some.
tons of value, but how do you do it without
I don't know, but I'm just saying,
everybody's
if
the problem?
that
Yeah.
was the if. That was
Yeah.
I started it with if.
Yeah.
Okay, if we can figure that out, I think that there could be some value in that. I don't know that we can. I'm just saying if we can.
Well, yeah, that's
That
the
we
biggest
get into what would look more likely what the opening of school will be next year.
Right.
And to give kids and remote learning students, if we can accommodate it, a chance to transition back before the end of the year so it's less anxiety provoking. but you don't have to do it this way to make that happen. I mean,
Right.
I just want to be clear that you can lead government in a way that does not cause undue stress and harm on the citizens. You can do that. If we had been given more time and had a little latitude, we could probably have done a nice, we have engagement with our families like we would like to, and come up with something that really makes sense that could accomplish both. But since we weren't given a seat at the table again, we're kind of just stuck in this challenge. And I don't know how parents, I think one of the problems, Gary, is as a board, we could say, we're going to put together a plan and you can, pound sand state. But I also know, based on my experience with the community, that anyone that doesn't like what we do is going to go to the commissioner, and then the heat's going to come back on us to make the, to make whatever changes are better suited to the people that are complaining. So either way, there's going to be argita, and I think we'll just try to do the very best that we can. We have a town hall meeting tomorrow. It's not about this topic, but I'll probably make similar comments tomorrow. Likely have a town hall meeting next week with parents again around this topic. And
it's been a long time since all of us have been in school. So, you think about trying to shift from 4 days a week back to 5 days a week, the challenge of bringing all the third graders back into their class, but then, my mind goes to the upperclassmen with credits and core classes and electives, and they've been working on a 4-day week, freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors, getting planned ready for graduation. What classes do they have to take? What do they do on Friday? It's going to take some real brain power to think about how we can get them in the anxiety that's going to be.
We can just shift to the red, because we're already red-black is my understanding, so maybe in high school we could just.
Well, the problem is we have to
middle
figure
school,
out
it's gonna be
planning
the hardest.
time, because our planning time's on Friday right now.
Well,
So we have to modify the
That
schedule.
really is a staffing issue, right? If we don't have the staff to help sub teachers out or whatever, you can't do the planning time during the day.
Well, some of it is just, you have to, it's different situation in the different grade levels, right?
Sure.
So in the cohort model, the kids are staying in the classroom, and you need more people to monitor the kids so that teachers can go have their lunch and stuff like that. We don't have any prep period built in because the kids have to be supervised at all time. So that took out any capacity in our schedule. And then when you added the staggered start and ending, that ate up a good chunk of our time too. So there's some things that they're working on right now. They're taking a look at what makes sense. What I asked them to do was try to stay with a similar routine that you have now, because kids understand those routines. If
And they're comfortable with them.
they're comfortable with them, we know that our safety protocols work well, and consider the fact that on Fridays, even though we don't necessarily have to have a full day on Friday to meet this requirement, that there's in my opinion, that will create challenges for parents who now have to go back to work full time, and so try to keep some of those things in mind as you're contemplating how we're going to do this. So more to come. I don't have any other answers, but that's kind of the framework we're working in.
And I had just asked Susan to bring this up in this forum since we were meeting tonight anyway, just so you guys were all on the same page and the public hears what we're dealing with. Because it's a paradigm shift that's happening very rapidly. We're trying to move the boat in the Suez Canal, as some might say.
Too soon.
So, Susan, I appreciate the work that you have already done on this that I know of, and the team is working right now to get it done. Any support that we can be as a board, which please let us know. And we'll just take it as it comes.
Yeah,
And thanks to the teachers, as always.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would say that might be helpful tonight is to, and I don't know if we'll need it or not, but a waiver from the procurement policy. It could mean that we need to get more furniture for the kids that are coming back from remote or something like that. I don't know what it means, but it might be just a temporary waiver, declare the emergency again and let us get what we need immediately without having to wait for, board approval. Only on things that would, not on everything, obviously, but
I think
just
it
on.
expired in the summer.
That was my question,
It expired October 30th.
Oh, we extended, yeah, you're right.
because we did extend it. Okay. I don't know what that policy is specifically off the top of my head.
I don't know, I can look for it.
All right, so we'll go to the next thing, Gary, if you do that. As we talked about, this information over the weekend sort of changed things, but the last time we met, the plan was to have the COVID Protocol Review Task Force meet, which they did. They were comprised of parents Amy Hill, Sarah Soster, Jen Wieselquist, Zoe McGurk, a student, Jen Fernice, Diane McCormick, Jessica Terrio from the Newmarket Teachers Association, Jody Hopping from the Support Staff Association, and Jamie Hayes, the athletic director and coach, and Sean Pine of the elementary school principal, and Susan and I were on that. When we met on Thursday, there was a request from the board members to try to get a proposal to the board as expeditiously as possible with April vacation coming, which was the entire plan. And we had a plan that was tentative, and then the news came out and it modified that plan. So Susan, do you want to review sort of what the task force did and all that stuff?
Sure. So we had a lot of conversation about, some of the challenges, that are before all of us with, changing protocols, vaccinations happening so quickly, lots of information going out in the broader press prior to any of us being able to find it, process it, understand it, and answer questions, which is a very difficult place for all of us to be. It creates a lot of cosmic unrest with everybody. Of course, when there's those questions, you want to be able to ask, your school leaders or your school board members, and to not be able to respond because you can't make heads or tails out of things. It's a very uncomfortable place to be. So I thought that the dialogue was really good.
It was.
It's always good to have multiple stakeholders in on the dialogue, because I think it's important for board members or administrators or teachers to hear one another's concerns and thoughts and worries, and to try to because it makes it real.
There were definitely a few topics that I had not even considered that came up at the meeting, and I said, I never thought that would be an issue, but you're right, it is. So I definitely think that having those different perspectives is very valuable.
Yeah, and so one of the things that, of course, we had five items that we had heard kind of pinging around a little bit that we wanted a lot centered around quarantine and travel. So we spent a bit of time on that. The 5-day-a-week, we didn't have much information at the time. I've shared with you all I can share with you on that particular topic. But I think some of the things that made all of us really pause for a moment was when the student rep talked about how worried students were coming back from April vacation, because kids are talking about, they're going to travel here and they're going to travel there, and when they get back, they're not going to tell anybody, and they're just going to come in and they're not going to quarantine, and how that's really causing a lot of anxiety amongst students. And
that's the part that I never considered.
And then that concern was repeated by high school personnel that were in the room, that they were hearing the same kinds of things, and multiple families traveling in places that are high risk, and then saying that they were going to come back and not tell anybody that they had traveled. And and then there's the other side, you know, of students wanting to go and visit their schools that they had applied to and haven't even been on their campus yet, and they wanted to take little road trips, you know, to go see those campuses for the first time, because during the pandemic they've been, you know, hunkering down and not traveling, and this was the last chance for them to go. And so there's a whole lot of dialogue around, you know, why there was a lot of nervousness around this quarantine piece. So originally, the consensus was to recommend a 1 week shift to remote, which was also controversial because there are many people that we've had this information out for a very long time that we were not going to go remote after the April break, and accordingly plan to stay local so that their kids could be here. And so there was a lot of dialogue around anger that, you know, they've foregone something that maybe they could have visited a parent or something that they haven't seen in a long time. So all of it, like every conversation, it's you know, there's these competing challenges, and how do you square those tensions? But after you know, Monday's meeting with the commissioner, I let the group know that that was not an option, that we wouldn't be able to do that. And so we talked again, we talked through what does this mean, you know? And by the end of the dialogue on Monday, the recommendation here before you is the recommendation that there's a lot of confidence in the protocols we've been following. There are families that send their kids here because of the protocols we're following, and to loosen those protocols is not something that any of us were feeling made a lot of sense. You know, what we're doing is working, and so the recommendation from that task force is that we defined the standard to be CDC recommendation. So, because they tend to follow science, their decisions when they're changing their protocols are less driven by politics than they are about science and having studies to document it. And so there was a comfort level among all stakeholders to follow CDC. And then within that it would be the guidelines based on the particular circumstance. In other words, if it was travel, it would be the CDC travel guidance. If it was, you know, close contact, it would be their close contact guidance. So it would be specific to the particular area of guidance that was published by CDC. So if something changes, then we would go to that. And then within, if there's a range, that we would still follow the highest standard, okay? So if it says 6 feet is what we recommend and we continue to recommend, however 3 feet is permissible, that we would still strive for the 6 feet, okay? Just as an example, so just to give the example of within a particular guideline, how the highest standard works. So by doing this too, we don't need to renegotiate an MOA because our MOAs already say that, the highest standard, but at least now we have a place where parents can kind of keep up to speed on it, and we can as well. So so that is what our recommendation is to go with the CDC. We had a conversation about the fact that we have been told in no uncertain terms that there would be no way to enforce the travel protocol of CDC over the New Hampshire one, because they've been very, very clear that they are not going to support any quarantines after travel. And so we recognize that we can't stop students from coming in even if we have this. What we can only do is ask parents that if they are going to travel, that they do follow the CDC guideline. And what that is for traveling is that when upon your return, 3 to 5 days after your return that you get a test, and that you stay home for 7 days. And if you have a negative test and you have no symptoms after 7 days, then your student would return to us. I also want to say and be really clear, we support every child, whether they're quarantined, remote, or on campus. The legend, or wherever that came from, that students would be marked absent is not true. We have not marked students absent unless they've been absent or they're disengaged from any learning altogether. So if your child stays home and you self-quarantine for the 7 days, our teachers will absolutely provide work for them to do and check and touch base with them. They do that now, and they will continue to do that. I think what would be helpful is if you are going to travel, that you let us know so that teachers have time to get materials together for your kids. We have a couple of weeks before we go out on break, and if you are going to travel and your children are not vaccinated, which I don't think any of them are at this point, and they need to follow this guidance, we would greatly appreciate knowing in advance. And then that's, I guess, the best we can do. So that's the recommendation, to follow CDC, acknowledge that there's differences between CDC and New Hampshire, that it's our desire to continue to follow the science, and modify our recommendations moving forward based on those that are recommended by them to the greatest extent possible.
And Susan,
Did I miss anything?
if people don't get tested, the recommendation is to stay home and self-quarantine for 10 days.
Yes, if they choose not
If
to.
they choose not to get tested.
Yeah, and in here, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at the links, but there is a little article in there for parents about having their little ones COVID tested. I think people might find that helpful too. The New York Times Kids and COVID Tests.
Yeah, one of the members of the task force was commenting that some of the, especially the elementary school parents, were nervous about getting the children tested because of the way the test is administered, and so they were afraid to do it because of that.
I'll tell you it was a lot more pleasant this time than it was last time.
Yeah.
Can I ask real quick, if a family does not have the means to pay for the test, is there help for them? Not from the district, but from the state?
I think the tests are free.
I didn't think that.
I pay $10, I'll tell you that.
We went to Walgreens.
There are sites, there always have been sites that testing is free, and if you go on, I've sent it out before, there's a map, and it shows where free clinics are. It's on our website too, but I couldn't tell you exactly which one, but there is information about those site locations.
And it's on the state,
Yes.
Colby website, okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Am I hearing that we don't have the ability to enforce
the travel,
these recommendations?
The quarantine recommendation.
the quarantine for travel.
We don't have the ability
We will not get support from the state.
to enforce this. We are asking families,
Strongly recommend.
we are strongly asking
Really
families to quarantine for 7 days after you travel.
For the greater good of everyone.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Kids will be supported.
The kids will be supported.
And the kids will reach out to the teachers prior. The teachers will provide all the children adequate work that would be the same, as close to what we could
As best they
possibly
can.
help
To the best
with,
they can.
to
Yeah.
the best of the ability.
It just wouldn't be synchronous, which is not ideal, but it's not, we tried to be clear so that families wouldn't find themselves in this circumstance. And, we'll continue to do as much as we can for the kids as possible.
And I think Susan's point of, if your plan is to travel and you're going to follow through the protocol of quarantining, letting the teachers know as soon as possible so that they can prepare the student and themselves for that period of time as best they can.
And again, even the recommendation from New Hampshire, CDC, and this school district is that you don't travel unless it's for essential purposes. It is still the recommendation of the state of New Hampshire, CDC, and remains ours. We are not condoning traveling unless, but we understand that we're also not going to interview every person about what the reasons for their travel plans are, but it still remains a recommendation of all parties.
And is the task force gonna still look at recommending some other changes that you spoke about, or is that, such as start times, and there was some other
Well,
things
we
on the list?
The start times wouldn't really be, I think, the way we were thinking about it is that we would follow, these would be kind of the rules of engagement we would follow in making our adjustments. That said, I asked this group if they would still have our meeting that we had originally planned for Thursday, so that if we had some ideas about what we were doing, we'd have kind of a sounding board that has parents and students and stuff on it, since we're not going to have a all-out, multi-stakeholder planning process, because time just does not permit. So we'll still use them, but the recommendation for whatever we do for 5-day would not be from that group per se.
Can
I know we've been restrict, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go for
I know, I believe anyways, we've been restricting people's access to the building, including some of the people from Seacoast Mental Health Center who used to provide in-person counseling.
That recommendation remains both for the state of New Hampshire guidelines as well as CDC. That volunteers and non-essential adults not,
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
I just question if they can provide as much mental health service in person, or remotely as they can in person. And I don't know the answer to that.
yeah, the
It probably depends
recommendation
case by
from
case.
CDC and from the state of New Hampshire is to not provide non-educational services or use volunteers or anything like that, to keep it to essential personnel required for your school programming. That still remains. That's still a protocol, just like not congregating before and after school, and cohorting remains in place. Those are not changes recommended by CDC or New Hampshire either.
Andrew, you had something you wanted to
Yeah,
say?
so if we're gonna use the CDC guidelines from now on, if a person's exposed, are they gonna follow 14 days or 10 days?
It is, if they're exposed, it's 14 days.
Okay. So my question is, New Hampshire's 10 days now, I believe, right?
Well, actually, New Hampshire still strongly recommends 14, but 10 days is permitted. And
Okay.
and they say they have a few caveats in here. If somebody's fully vaccinated, but I just want to be clear about this, if somebody's fully vaccinated and they're not symptomatic, then there is no need to quarantine.
Okay.
Okay, so most of our staff will be fully vaccinated, so that should help on one side of the equation. The student piece is another. Students are not going to be vaccinated. Who knows when? I mean, it's open to them, but I was just reading before I came here that in this particular area, they're not ready to do that. Like, they're overwhelmed with the number of vaccinations. They're trying to get it out to the folks that are in the queue before those that are, 16 to 21. So that's going to be a challenge. But if people social distance to the degree that they can, because we can't social distance on buses. It's just an awful conundrum we find ourselves in. There's just no good way to square it. But that is true. 14 days.
So the reason I asked is, because I thought it was 14 days too.
It is.
And then I was told at my school it was 10, and then DHS called me and said after 10 I could leave quarantine. Because what I was told is different than the 14 days in my situation. So is
Probably
that,
from the DHHS, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
so if that, is that gonna happen to a student saying I should be able to go back after 10 days and not wait the 14 days I'm being told?
No, our policy with CDC
Okay.
would be the one that prevails.
Okay,
It still says, even in the New Hampshire guidelines, they
Yeah.
recommend 14 days. It still even says it in the New Hampshire one. It's just when you call, they go with, and in the CDC, it talks about the 10, under these circumstances, you could lower it, but they still, and if you read through it, and we've all read through it in our task force, in both cases, the recommendation is 14
Okay.
days.
okay,
New Hampshire allows a lesser one, like New Hampshire allows non-domestic travel without quarantine. It really doesn't change what the actual science and the recommendations are. It's just what rules do they apply
okay.
that are different.
So
Do
it's
you
not.
follow me on that?
Yeah, I just wanna make sure that there's not a situation where like, with the travel,
No.
where we can't force a kid, but you can force a student in this case, to quarantine for
14 days, yeah,
Okay.
If they're exposed.
Yeah,
if they're exposed for an
So-
exposure.
I guess then, the question for the board is it our comfort that it's the CDC recommendations going forward, and should the CDC have less restrictive recommendations or more restrictive recommendations, we're just gonna adopt those on the fly, or do we have to meet again? So for instance, in a month, the CDC says, no mask, no, just an absurd, no mask, no quarantine, no anything, or are we just saying that we're just gonna follow the CDC? Or if in a month the CDC says quarantine for a month after any travel, are we gonna follow that?
I think they're good questions, Gary. I think you almost have to say, I guess it depends. If it's something significant, I think we should all have a conversation, because it's like we see right now, all around us, we see, reporters saying this, and the governor saying that, and the social media, all kinds of different things going on, and this school district's doing this, and this one's doing that. And I think it always comes back to, it has to come back to what makes sense for us, And I don't think you can just categorically, I think they'll make probably some minor tweaks here and there, but if something wholesale changes, I'll be like a parrot, out here saying, this is coming up, and, we gotta have a conversation about it.
I think the fact that things changed from Friday to Monday, and it was a wholesale change in terms of what was permissible and what was allowed, I think that things are evolving so quickly that it's gonna have to really be, as Susan said, on a case-by-case basis, looking at when it's arising, because who knows?
But I think the other thing too, with going with the CDC recommendation, is that they're not changing wildly from day to day.
That's true.
They're
No.
not. And so the New Hampshire ones are.
yeah.
They're going like, woo, woo, but actually CDC has
Been the
not
same.
changed wildly. They have, shared broadly, why they're making changes before they change them, and usually they give people a little lead time and heads up along the way. The CDC guidelines have really not changed wildly at all, but the New Hampshire ones have, and I think that makes people, creates confusion and anxiety, and was a factor in why CDC is being recommended by the task force.
So if the CDC recommends 14 to 10 or 10 to 14, we're going with 14. If the CDC changed that to say 10 to 7, we would go to 10.
Yeah,
We'd do the highest number of what the CDC
within
guides.
the range of what
Within
they
their
say.
range.
If they dropped it back down to 10, right, and that was the max, let's say everybody's vaccinated, I'm just pretending, and
Right.
and they say, okay, based on the science and what we're seeing from the research, we're going to change our quarantine recommendation to 10, then I would say that we'd all understand why, we'd all understand why we know in advance, and we could explain it. So, to me, I think that, there's a lot of wisdom in in the recommendation that's before you.
So, I do have a motion which I think is accurate, based on my very quick looking up. But I recommend we have a 30-day suspension of policy DJ, which is the purchasing policy, DJE, which is the bidding requirement policy, and DJF, which is the local purchasing policy, and any other policy which would restrict the SAU from purchasing any furnishing and materials needed to allow us to transition to 5-day a week in school learning.
Yep.
We have
I'll
a-
second that.
We have a motion for Mr. Swanson, a second for Ms. McKinney.
And I think I got them all, that's why I added that caveat first.
And just so that the new board members know, when we did this the last time, at the next meeting or at prescribed times, they would give us a detail of all things that were purchased, so we knew what was going on.
So there's a $10,000 purchasing limit that they need to bring to the board. And there's another, the local purchasing requirement, which you try to buy things locally if you can. And I feel like there's another one that I'm missing, but I don't recall specifically.
Any other questions or discussion? We'll move to the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Approved unanimously.
Thank you very
Um,
much.
I seek a motion to approve the recommendation from the COVID Protocol Review Task Force.
So moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion for Mr. Swanson and a second for Ms. McKinney. I would just like to thank the committee for their work. I look forward to meeting with them on Thursday, and, you know, their input was very valuable to me. Anything else?
Especially with how quickly it was. Thank you.
Yes.
They did a great job. It was, you know, especially the group that got the core document together over the weekend, it was sort of, they worked very hard and then on the fly changed it, so I appreciate that as well.
Did they get T-shirts or something?
They just get the joy of being together. That's the beauty of it all.
6 feet apart.
Yes. So we'll move to the vote. All those in favor of approving the proposal say aye.
Aye.
It's approved. All right, I seek a motion. Susan, is there anything else that I'm forgetting? I don't believe so.
Just the non-public.
Yep, I seek a motion to go into non-public session under RSA 91A 32E.
I'll second.
So we have a motion from Ms. Durant with a second from Elizabeth. Ms. McKinney. We'll do a roll call vote. Andrew?
Aye.
Ms. Durant?
Aye.
Me, yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Mr.
And I was just gonna say, when we return, we'll just be adjourning, so
Yes.
there'll be no further
Yes,
public discussions.
Exactly. And we'll go into non-public at 6:04 PM.